Welcome to this deep dive. We are so glad you're here. Today, our mission is to unpack a really fascinating foundational text. It's called The Digital Humanities, a primer for students and scholars. And it's by Eileen Gardner and Ronald G. Musto.
Yeah, and it's a topic that honestly is probably already a huge part of your life, even if you don't realize it yet.
Exactly. I mean, whenever you watch the medieval high drama of Game of Thrones,
Right.
right? Or if you're exploring some meticulously reconstructed ancient city in a video game,
Oh,
or even, just catching an NPR story about a newly discovered shipwreck that got mapped by underwater drones, like
yeah,
you are already consuming the work of digital humanists. It is just everywhere.
it really is. It's the water we swim in. And ironically, because it is so ubiquitous, that's exactly where the friction starts.
Right.
Because it's so seamlessly integrated into our media and our archives, it totally resists a clean definition. It's not just a single discipline you can put in a neat little box.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because trying to define the digital humanities today, it kind of feels like asking a fish to describe water.
Right, yeah.
It's so deeply woven into the fabric of our lives that stepping back to actually analyze it feels almost impossible. But the authors of this primer, Gardner and Musto, they aren't just like modern theorists observing this from the sidelines.
No, they have very deep roots here.
Yeah, the book points out they were publishing early scholarly ebooks like way back in 1993.
Yeah, 1993, they built this thing called the Marvels of Rome for the Macintosh using HyperCard. So they've really lived through this entire evolution.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. And, their very first defining choice in this book is actually grammatical. They
Right.
intentionally use the plural form, so the digital humanities,
Hmm.
rather than making it singular.
That feels like a deliberate pushback against something, like they're trying to make a point.
Oh, they definitely are. It's a major pushback against the acronym DH. Yeah, in the academic world, DH has become this really aggressive administrative term. It gets used to draw these rigid lines around, who gets funding from the university, who gets to form a specialized department. And
Oh, I see. Like who is considered a certified expert and who isn't.
exactly. Turf wars. By insisting on the plural, Gardner and Musto are fighting to keep the tent open. They want to acknowledge that there are dozens of different approaches and skill sets involved.
So they're actively resisting the urge to, like, lock the concept away in some specialized ivory tower.
Right. And they contrast this with how other fields define things. Like a physicist defines gravity with, strict forces and formulas.
Sure.
An economist defines poverty using hard census data. But if a humanist wants to define a concept like peace, they have to trace the evolution of that word through history and language.
Because humanistic study begins and ends with language.
Exactly. And the text mentions how scholars have really struggled to understand the impact of these new digital tools on that language. They pull this great quote from the novel The Leopard, where the Prince of Selena says, everything must change so that everything will remain the same.
Wow. Okay, so that quote, that perfectly captures the early academic denial, doesn't it?
It really does.
Uh,
For a long time, traditional scholars just tried to comfort themselves. They treated the digital shift as, like, just a faster delivery mechanism.
Right, like saying it's just Gutenberg's printing press, part two, like a computer is just a really fast typewriter, but the underlying work stays exactly the same.
Yeah, and that was the prevailing metaphor for years. The digital revolution is like Gutenberg. But Gardner and Musto explain why that metaphor is completely failing us now.
Why is it failing?
Because the digital shift isn't just changing how scholars publish their work. It is fundamentally changing how scholars actually think and process information. They talk about this concept of disaggregating data.
Okay, let's pause on that word, disaggregating, because that sounds incredibly academic. What does that actually look like in practice?
Well, think about the transition from the acoustic guitar to the electric guitar.
Okay.
At first, people thought the electric guitar was just a louder acoustic instrument, just a faster printing press, so to speak.
Right, just turn up the volume.
But the introduction of the amplifier didn't just make the music louder. It allowed for feedback and distortion and sustain.
Oh, wow.
It created entirely new genres of music that were just physically impossible to play on an acoustic instrument.
Ah, so the technology doesn't just scale the old work, it bends the medium into something entirely new.
Precisely. In the humanities, disaggregation means taking, say, a massive 10,000-page medieval corpus and shattering it into individual data points.
Yeah.
You aren't just reading left to right like a normal book anymore.
Right.
You can have a computer instantly map how often the concept of mercy appears in geographical proximity to the concept of justice across 3 centuries of text.
Which reveals patterns that are totally invisible to the naked eye.
Exactly. It leaves the old categories of reading completely behind.
Okay, but if this shift is that deeply transformative, my modern brain immediately assumes it started in, like, a garage in Silicon Valley.
Hmm.
Sometime in the 1980s, some hacker decides to scan a Shakespeare folio.
Yeah, that's what everyone assumes. But the actual origin point of the digital humanities is completely wild. It takes us way back to 1949.
Wait, 1949?
Yeah, 1949, in Italy, of all places. The true beginning of the field is a collaboration between an Italian Jesuit priest and the founder of IBM.
Wait. So the first true digital humanist wasn't a tech bro or a computer scientist, but a Jesuit priest in the 1940s looking for a moral truth.
I know, it's amazing. Father Roberto Bussa. He approached Thomas J. Watson at IBM because he wanted help indexing the massive theological works of Thomas Aquinas.
Okay, this is where I have to push back a little because isn't an index just a glorified search function? How does counting Latin words on a 1940s punch card computer lead to what the book calls a doctrinal interpretation?
What's fascinating here is that you have to look at the mechanism of what he was doing.
Hmm,
Bussa wasn't just trying to find a word faster to save himself a trip to the library.
okay.
He recognized that human language is this vast, interconnected web.
Uh-huh.
If you want to understand how a thinker like Aquinas defines a huge moral concept like, say, free will, you can't just flip to the chapter titled Free Will.
Because it's baked into everything else he wrote.
Right. You have to track the really subtle linguistic changes in how he uses related verbs and adjectives across millions of words.
And a human brain, reading by candlelight simply cannot hold all of those connections at once.
Exactly. Bussa realized the mainframe computer wasn't just a calculator. It was a philosophical tool. The search and sort function of a machine could actually reveal the hidden architecture of human thought.
That is so profound.
Yeah, for Bussa, the computer was a means to a qualitative improvement of a moral goal. Computing power could actively elevate traditional humanistic work.
I mean, think about the last time you used a digital archive, or even just hit Ctrl+F on a massive PDF to find a specific pattern. You were doing exactly what Bussa dreamed of doing in 1949.
Yep.
But here's where the narrative shifts in the book. Because Bussa and Watson, they represent this harmonious, almost romantic collaboration between theology and technology. But if you fast forward to the modern academic landscape, things are tense.
Very tense.
Scholars today seem incredibly anxious about the digital shift. If early collaborations were so successful, why are scholars today so terrified?
Well, Gardner and Musto point out that we are at a really critical inflection point right now. Over the past decade, the rapid pace of technological disruption has started to plateau a bit.
Right, things aren't fundamentally upending the world every 6 months anymore.
Exactly. We're in a period of consolidation. The dust is settling. And because of that, it's the perfect time to evaluate the real impact. But as people evaluate it, a massive clash of definitions is breaking out.
A turf war over what actually counts as digital humanities?
You see it everywhere. Like if you look up the Wikipedia entry for digital humanities, it offers a highly practical, functional definition. It just lists tools.
Like data visualization and text mining.
Right. Just a toolbox.
Yeah.
But then you read a scholar like Ann Burdick in her book, Digital Humanities, and she defines the field as entirely philosophical.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she asks what it means to be a human being living in a network age, what it means to participate in fluid communities of practice. Those are two radically different ways of viewing the exact same field.
Here's where it gets really interesting because it isn't just an abstract intellectual debate, right, Britt? There is real money on the line here.
Big money.
The authors highlight this deep existential fear among traditional scholars regarding funding from giants like the Mellon Foundation or the National Science Foundation. They're terrified of what the book calls the digerati.
Yeah, the digerati, these high-end futurists creating massive wonder shows.
Well, wonder shows, like what?
Like a multi-million-dollar grant given to a team using NASA-derived imaging technology to capture billion-pixel 3D interactive models of the Château de Fontainebleau in France.
Wait, Okay, I can totally see why a traditional scholar would panic over that. Are we in danger of just subsidizing techno spectacles?
It's a huge concern.
If I'm a solitary scholar doing, essential, painstaking textual editing on some obscure medieval manuscript, I'm looking at that 3D VR castle project and thinking, I am going to lose my career. I can't compete with an IMAX movie.
And that fear is highly valid.
Yeah.
When funding bodies are attracted to the shiny and the new, foundational philological work gets left in the dust. But the authors ask us to look at the psychological fallout of that fear.
What do you mean?
They ask, does this intimidation by the digerati actually inhibit potential users from adopting highly accessible, everyday digital tools?
Oh, I see. Because the traditional scholar thinks the digital humanities must look like $1 million virtual reality simulation, they refuse to even touch a basic text mining tool that could save them 3 years of research.
Exactly. The spectacle paralyzes them. The fear of being marginalized by the extreme high end of the digital spectrum actually stops traditional humanists from claiming the mundane digital tools that could revolutionize their daily work.
Wow. So we have this deep modern identity crisis. We have traditionalists clinging to their physical texts in fear, and futurists building virtual reality wonder shows.
Yeah.
And the authors argue that to resolve this modern divide, we actually have to look backward. We have to figure out what the humanities were fundamentally designed to do in the first place.
And this is where the book takes us on a trip to 14th century Italy.
Right. Because if modern scholars are terrified that digital tools and high-end funding are turning universities into, like, corporate businesses.
Gardner and Musto point out a massive historical irony here. The original medieval universities were already corporate businesses.
That blew my mind. I have always pictured early medieval universities as these deeply philosophical, romantic places, just filled with monks pondering the universe by candlelight.
Right, that's the stereotype.
Right.
But the text relies on historians like Paul Oscar Christeller to show that early medieval education in Italy was intensely practical.
It was essentially the 14th century equivalent of an MBA program.
Yes. The early Italian university system was designed specifically for the business classes. The focus was on literacy in the vernacular, basic business math, drafting private contracts, keeping accounts.
So totally secular, professionalized stuff.
Exactly. It was a functional education meant to produce doctors, lawyers, and administrators who could operate a contemporary urban economy.
Enter Francesco Petrarch. He lives from 1304 to 1374. He looks at this highly practical, career-oriented university system, and he is absolutely disgusted by it.
He was. He saw a society that was decadent, corrupt, and completely mired in power politics and spiritual emptiness. The university was producing skilled bureaucrats, but it wasn't producing ethical human beings.
So Petrarch was basically the ultimate disruptor of his era. He looked at the medieval equivalent of an MBA program, rejected it, and hacked the educational system to focus on moral action and ethical life instead.
That's a perfect way to put it. He actively rejects the medieval Latin of the professional classes and turns back to antiquity. He consciously rediscovers ancient Roman texts, specifically the letters of Cicero.
But he doesn't just read Cicero because the grammar is pretty, right?
No, not at all.
He takes those ancient texts and uses them as a blueprint to reform the world.
For Petrarch, understanding ancient texts was a personal solace, sure, but more importantly, it was a weapon to renew society. He and his followers focused on the trivium, grammar, rhetoric, logic, but they demanded that this learning result in public moral action.
And they were incredibly successful at it. The text notes that by 1444, with figures like Leonardo Bruni, these humanists weren't just hiding in academic towers.
No, they were immensely influential.
They were serving as chancellors of city-states and holding high public office.
They were active civic leaders. And what's really fascinating is that the word humanism wasn't even coined until 1808.
Wait, really? By who?
By a German philosopher named Friedrich Emanuel Niethammer. But those original Renaissance thinkers, they built the literal infrastructure of knowledge centuries earlier. They helped create the modern library system, ensuring collections were open to qualified users, not just locked away by princes.
That's incredible.
They even drove the creation of commercial copy centers, the scriptoria, to distribute books faster.
So they were the original networkers. They were using the cutting-edge information technology of their time, the manuscript book, and eventually the printing press, to disseminate ethical, human-centric ideas directly to the public. Which brings up a massive contradiction. If the original Renaissance humanists were these active civic disruptors running governments and building libraries, How on earth did the humanities get the modern reputation of being dusty, isolated ivory towers?
To understand that, we have to move forward to the late 19th century.
Okay.
A German historian named Leopold von Ranke enters the picture, and he introduces a massive shift. He brings a new emphasis on scientific research and objective, empiricist methodology to the humanities.
So he wanted history and literature to be studied with the exact same objective, data-driven rigor as biology or chemistry.
Right. He insisted on scientifically derived truths, and this approach completely took over academic life. It moved higher education away from the public liberal arts model of the early republic and birthed the modern research university.
And that brought on strict professionalization.
Very strict. It created the system we know today. Rigorous peer review, highly specialized departments, closed scholarly societies, and the university press system.
It effectively locked the humanist in a room. It took them out of the public square, where they were the poet, the dramatist, the civic leader, and turned them into hyper-specialized academics, whose main job was evaluating secondary scholarship written by other hyper-specialized academics.
It isolated them, and that system of isolation was perfected and monetized post-World War II. The text points to figures like Vannevar Bush. He wrote Science, The Endless Frontier, and Clark Kerr, who created the master plan for the University of California system.
So they basically built the massive academic machine we have today.
Yes. They shaped what Gardner and Musto call the corporate university.
Think about the modern university today. When you walk onto a massive campus, does it feel like a place of profound moral awakening, or does it feel like a sprawling corporate entity obsessed with metrics, grant funding, and administrative bloat?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where the grand historical irony of the book clicks into place.
Let's hear it.
The modern corporate university of today, with its heavy emphasis on organization, accountability, and the monetization of research across all fields, is actually an ironic, complete return to the highly practical Italian system of the late Middle Ages.
We are right back where we started before Petrarch.
You got it.
We have returned to the medieval business school, an education system entirely focused on practical, career-oriented skills. And the public perception of the humanities has suffered massively because of it, leading to their marginalization.
Which brings us back to why the digital humanities matter so much today. The authors aren't arguing that every English professor needs to learn how to code Python just to appease a university administrator.
So what does this all mean? The digital humanities represent a potential return to the true, original Renaissance humanist mission.
Yes, exactly.
It is the opportunity to bypass the dusty ivory tower and the corporate gatekeepers. By using the absolute newest tools available, these massive digital iterations of rhetoric, grammar, and networking scholars can finally re-engage with the public.
Just as Petrarch used the rediscovery of Cicero and the new library networks to pull his society out of a spiritual rut, modern digital humanists can use vast digital archives and connected data to bring humanistic inquiry back to the center of civic life.
It frames history not as a straight line, but as a cycle.
It really does. But there's a lingering thought I want to leave you with, building on the idea that the Gutenberg metaphor is dead.
Okay.
The authors noted that treating the digital shift as just a new printing press is failing us. So if we accept that the digital world is no longer just a new kind of printing press, if it's actually an entirely new environment that disaggregates data and fundamentally changes the very way we think, process, and connect reality, how does that change the way you will document and write the history of your own life starting today?
Wow, that is a profound question to chew on. The tools we use don't just record our history, they shape how we literally think about it. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the digital humanities. Keep exploring the deep end of the knowledge pool, and we will catch you next time.